Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Matt Garber, the Chief Customer Officer for the Bureau of the Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department. Matt, thank you for joining me. And I understand you're a relatively new addition to the Bureau, and this is a very critical office to be taking charge of here. Just tell me, in the time that you've been at the Bureau, just what have been your top highlights of what's front of mind for you?
Absolutely. So I come to the position with the benefit of actually having been at the department for a period of time and being a senior advisor to the fiscal assistant secretary. And so I had a broad awareness of kind of what the fiscal service was doing and kind of how that fit into the broader Treasury Department objectives. And so about a year ago, I came into the Bureau to start working on kind of what would this new organization look like, what would the new role look like. And then formally and officially kind of took over that position in October of last year. And so one of the big things that I've certainly seen in the Bureau is that extreme dedication to our customers, and whether those are our agency customers, federal agencies who we serve as kind of a central financial manager for the federal government, or individual citizens interacting with us through payment services or things like retail securities and savings bonds. And so just high level of dedication from Bureau employees to making sure that we're meeting the needs of our customers, and in particular, kind of in this customer service sphere. One of the things where I think there's a lot of opportunity, I'm sure we'll talk more about, right, which is how do you build in customer experience as a discipline in the organization, not just necessarily as kind of an endpoint, a presentation layer, right? A person on the other side of the phone, but how do you really build that into your decision making? How do you build that into the way you build products and services? And so that's really kind of where my organization is spending a lot of time thinking and focusing about driving that longer term kind of cultural change to putting the customer at the beginning of the process, not just at the end.
Okay, great. And, in terms of the current state of CX at the Bureau, what would you make of that current state? And where would you see perhaps the biggest room for improvement or the biggest room for maturity of that CX?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, building a little bit off of kind of the previous question, I mean, certainly with the executive order on customer experience, with Treasury's designation as a high impact service provider, a lot of focus and energy around how are we kind of building that organization and thinking about the customer in our day-to-day work. Where I think we've really come a long way is, one, creating an organization, the Customer Experience Management Office, that is dedicated to focus on where are the challenges in our organization to delivering a positive experience. How do we implement the CX discipline as both an art and a science within the organization, building centralized capabilities, but also supporting our employees, right? And a couple of areas to highlight within our broader strategic plan, right? Really making customers a goal within our strategic plan for the next 4 years, as we build those customer experience practices, as we engage with the financial management community and our agency partners, and as we build a marketplace of services and solutions that meet all of their needs. So lots of really great movement in the past couple of years to bring some of these concepts to the forefront. Where there's a lot of opportunity, I think, is really defining what does all of that mean, and how do you make sure that you're kind of building that into your end-to-end processes. So we've done some of that basic work that a lot of federal agencies have done. We have journey maps, we have personas, right? We have some of that foundational work. But at the end of the day, instead of just outputs, are you creating an environment where you have measurable outcomes for your customers that are improving their experience, that are meeting their needs? And so certainly we, like many other federal agencies, have some room for improvement in that space. And that's really where we're focused over the coming years.
Okay, and one thing I want to really highlight here, because I think it's an interesting use case here, that you guys have this 2 tracks of customers that you mentioned, the agencies that you help facilitate, financial management type work, and then also the individuals, folks who are either giving the federal government payments or receiving payments from the federal government. Let's break down both of those, but starting with the agencies here, help my audience better understand kind of the day-to-day realities of what the Bureau of the Fiscal Service does to what those customer interactions with other agencies look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of easiest way to think of it as is the Bureau as kind of the central financial manager of the federal government, right? So a lot of people don't know that agencies don't have like bank accounts, right? So if I'm SSA and I have a benefits program that I need to administer, and I've got payments that need to come from point A to point B and land in a person's bank account, the agency itself actually comes through the fiscal service to process things like those payments. Same thing on collecting revenue for the federal government, right? So whether it's tax payments or park fees, any number of mechanisms. So if you think about our role in what we sometimes talk about, like the pipes of the government, right? So the money coming in and out, and then as a large kind of accounting function within the federal government. So that's kind of like our core central role. We also offer some additional services, whether that's within kind of payment integrity, data analytics, or also what lots of folks would recognize as like shared services through our administrative resource center. And that's beyond kind of just the financial management space into HR work, travel, procurement, things like that the government's really focused on creating centralized and shared capabilities across the government. So that's really, we interact with pretty much every single agency in lots of different ways. And within that, we have various different levels of customers. So CFOs and DCFOs, certainly big customers for us, engaging with them regularly, trying to understand what their needs are. Program areas and IT managers, right? So thinking about the systems that you have to intersect with to get from program administration into a payment and back. And then lots of end users. So whether that's our IPP system for processing like an invoice for a procurement, all of those individual employees across the federal government that are intersecting with us to do their day-to-day work. So we really do have this kind of amazing spread just in the federal government of the types of diversity of customers that we interact with.
It occurs to me as I hear all of that the Bureau really is in a lot of ways this backbone of shared services for the federal government. And I think case in point, one big thing that we have learned about is the Bureau's launch of a Quality Services Management Office, or QSMO, one of the sillier acronyms in government, specifically for financial management. Can you tell me a little bit about what that launch means for the Bureau and how it achieves that core idea that we're talking about here about shared services as a driver?
Absolutely. So we were really excited, particularly in December, where we launched the QSMO marketplace, right? And so this was one step on a long journey from designation by OMB a couple of years ago, actually launching a marketplace that provides services and solutions to our federal partners. And a couple of kind of key points about that. The QSMO really functions as a broker, right, between consumers of services and providers of services. There are federal shared service providers that exist today, and of course, the common services that we offer within Treasury. And then there's this robust space within the commercial space of providers of all different types, whether it's a core financial system, auxiliary services, business analytics, right, reporting and transaction processing. And so where we really saw our role was, how do we open up access to our agency partners to this really broad array of services and solutions that meet their needs? And the big real kind of approach we took as we went down this path to stand up the QSMO and get a marketplace of services was putting the customer first. It was one of our core principles in our business case that we put forward to OMB and the Shared Services Governance Board, and has been kind of one of those real key principles that we've held on to throughout this process and will continue to do so now that it's under the Chief Customer Officer. And one of the big things that we started with was, well, before you go out and just start offering solutions, why don't you talk to the people who are consuming them and figure out what they need? And we spent a lot of time really engaging with agency customers and end users and CFOs and the broader financial management community to say, what are your needs? And what are the ways you're looking for those to be fulfilled? And ultimately got to a point where we said, okay, we've got this kind of this suite of products and services. It's not just about that core system, which is where we tend to go, right? We tend to say, I need this big system, this big modernization, but a bunch of other services that agencies are hungry for, right? And that could be any number of things, from like transaction processing or business analytics to things like RPA and emerging technologies. And what they really want to know is, hey, I want to know that those things meet the standards, right? That in the federal government, we have this baseline of standards that we need to operate under. A lot of it's very similar to the private sector, but we also have our own unique kind of special needs, and whether that's at a federal government level or that are unique to the agencies. And so when we created that marketplace, it was about how do we capture that 80% solution that meets the needs of most of our agencies, while allowing for that flexibility. So when I'm coming into the marketplace and procuring something, I can do the special things that are unique to delivering my mission for my consumers. So we're really excited to launch that. It's going to continue to grow with about 4 commercial vendors, 3 shared service providers, and a bunch of bureau products in there. And we continue to get applications from the private marketplace to be added into that. So we're really excited where this could go in the future.
Okay, well, to switch to the other side of things, the other side of the coin here, individuals, the public, and the payments that go to and from them. Let's go into a little bit of detail there. How is the Bureau, stepping up its game in the customer experience that they experience?
Absolutely. So I would even break that bucket up into like 2 even more refined buckets, right? So there's our own direct to consumer work, right? So think about a savings bond. And then there's us kind of as the conduit between an individual citizen and an agency, right? So payment services. Within things like payment services, we've really leaned in, and we have an organization that spent a lot of time thinking about how do we open up to create like e-commerce based solutions, so that as individual citizens are procuring services from the federal government, they can do it in the way they might be used to with other places, right? So I don't need to write a paper check anymore and mail it in with a little piece of paper and like wait for it to be processed. I can use things like a Visa card. I can use things like Apple Pay. I can use things like Amazon. So really opening up the space to say, individual citizens now expect some level of their interaction with the federal government to align with their interaction with the commercial sector. And so really driving the use of those tools from the agency perspective, and making sure that our tools and technology are available to meet those needs of those individual citizens. On the kind of more direct to consumer side of things, that's where we have a lot more control on understanding the needs of our users and driving solutions that really kind of meet or exceed those expectations. And one space where we know this is, we've been focused on, right, is in that savings bond, in that what we call retail security space, where folks are either buying something like an I bond, which got a lot of attention over the past couple of years, or even buying a Treasury bill or bond, which is also getting a lot of attention right now through something called Treasury Direct. And this was a program that was kind of fading to the background, right? So not everyone knows what a savings bond anymore. Not everyone knows you can buy a Treasury bill just as an individual consumer. And so when there was a lot of interest, tons of people were coming to us seeking this, and our technology and our information and our website just wasn't quite there to handle that type of volume. And so we spent a lot of time saying, what really are the challenges that these consumers are facing as they're engaging with us? And maybe we can't fix all of them tomorrow, right? These are old systems, this is old technology, but where can we make either big improvements or incremental improvements to that experience? And there's a couple of places where I think we can highlight where we really captured that, right? One was just in that informational website. The old Treasury Direct website, I'm not sure if it was from the 90s, but it sure looked like it, right? And it was built in a way that every time more information came, we added another page, we added more content. And it was just really hard to find very basic information, like what is the rate of a bond? And so we spent time redesigning that website so that just as people were coming in, because there was lots of information around the I bonds, coming in to get information, they could find it easier. They could navigate the website easier. They could get what they were looking for, and they didn't feel the need to pick up the phone and talk to a financial advisor to find some basic information about a government product. The second thing that we really focused on there was enhancing self-service capabilities, in particular when we think about things like password reset, right? So making it so that individual consumers can do what they need to do without interacting with another human being. And then the third piece was really about investing in some technology improvements that streamline some processes like changing a bank account, right? Where I don't need to send them a form and get those things done. So those are some really good examples about how we've looked at that relationship and made some targeted improvements in a relatively short period of time with relatively low investment to improve that experience, particularly in times when there was lots of energy and lots of interest and lots of activity in that space.
Okay. Well, I would, also offer up one other dimension of the customer experience, whether the public was aware of it or not. Certainly with the past couple of years with the COVID-19 pandemic and the stimulus checks that went out the door, I think a lot of the calls and attention went to the IRS in terms of who got what, but I believe it was you guys at the Bureau actually, issuing the checks, actually issuing the direct deposit payments, and facilitating unprecedented is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but a very unprecedented workload.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I would highlight that as just a really fabulous partnership, particularly in a time of crisis, right? So the IRS and the Bureau of Fiscal Service had to work really closely together to make sure, one, we had the information we needed to get the payments out the door, just from a file process perspective, right? Like who gets what money. But two, really partnering together to say, what's this going to look like over the coming weeks so we can be ready. We can do what we need to do to make sure that we're getting the checks out the door. And then on our side, I think there was a lot of really great staff that were thinking creatively about, if we have capacity issues, where can we move faster, right? In times of crisis, really you're trying to move as fast as possible and as accurately as possible, but it's really about speed. How can I get these payments out the door as fast as possible? So thinking about the ways that we could support the IRS in that ultimate goal, right? Which was getting a certified payment from the tax record right into the hands of the consumer as fast as possible during a time of crisis. So yeah, I think we were a big part of that process, but it was such a wonderful kind of team and collaborative effort between the IRS and the Fiscal Service to get that work done.
All right. Well, while we're on that thread, of course, the federal government always finds opportunities to, build on top of the latest thing, the latest tragedy, the latest emergency, and in its response to it, there's always kind of new best practices, lessons learned, things of that nature. Just given, again, that unprecedented workload that you just described, what were some of those things you said, like speed is of the essence here, and that this is a real stress test for how the Bureau can do these things at scale. Other kind of takeaways, other kinds of lessons learned that you want to share with us in terms of what came about all of that?
Yeah, I think one real kind of interesting piece in this space is we sometimes think of the government as these massive organizations, right? And I think within that, particularly the economic impact payment space and things like that in times of crisis, if you can get a smaller group of really talented, really smart, really dedicated people together, and it's the right balance of skill sets, right? People who understand systems, people who understand policies, people who understand the kind of mission outcomes, people that understand the end-to-end processes. And you can get them in a room and say, figure this out, right? Figure this out. You're going to have really strong, dedicated public servants who are going to find a solution for you and creative things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of, right? If you were just standing at the peak of the mountain mandating. And so I think as we think about kind of future opportunities or future crises or anything that comes around the room, that's one thing that I think we would take to heart to say, let's just make sure we get a handful of really kind of good points of view, small team, and let them do their work, and they're going to get us a really good result.
Okay. And I actually want to circle back to something you said earlier about some of the the self-service capabilities that have been rolled out. Because I think, when we talk about customer experience, we always talk about the most effective management of finite resources, like, employees, like people manning those call centers, and, triaging, the best way that those resources can be managed. And, it seems like there are some pretty straightforward things, like you said, like, password resets, where the customer knows exactly what kind of service they want. It's a very low tech type thing. And there really doesn't need to be, a person in the middle to help facilitate that. They can just go and do that. Whereas there are some other services I can think of where that potential customer might need a little more help from the bureau, from that call center employee, to navigate them to where ultimately they need to go. Let's go into a little bit more detail there, because I think that's a really curious thing. How, beyond, the self-service side of things, which is really important, how does the bureau kind of do that triage of assessing, what level of help is needed for what service?
Right. So this kind of gets to this concept of, customer measurement and customer engagement, right? So how do you know the needs of the customer? Or are you just telling yourself a fable, right? So, and there's two kind of big ways we can go about doing this. One, you can ask, right? And so certainly you can have survey capability on your website. You can read through that. You can see what's happening, or you can watch and you can say, where's everyone going on the website? How are people navigating through my IVR and my call center? What are my call center agents telling me people are interested in, right? And giving some space, I think, to, particularly if you start to see things like increased volumes or lots of overwhelmed consumers coming in, giving some space to do that investigative research to say, really, where is the problem? Because a lot of the times I think we move to solutions so fast that we're not actually addressing the root cause, right? And so giving some space to understand the root cause. So for example, one of the big things, we'll go back to the self-service concept just as an example, which is when we first had a large amount of volume, we knew it was because people were locking themselves out of their account, right? And the solution there wasn't add 200,000 call center agents, right, to answer every single phone call and walk it through. It was address the kind of core issue, which is that password reset piece, make it self-service. And I think in the same way, you can do that with pretty much any issue you're looking at, to say how much of this is about I don't understand the information versus I have to have a human with me. Most of the time on the I have to have a human with me, you could go even further in that space and say, what are the underlying policies or business processes that are creating that need? Is this a space that an individual consumer actually says, it's my preference or it's my desire to have someone walk me through this? Or did we create such an overly burdensome process and regulatory kind of schema in the way that we created an end-to-end business process to redeem a bond or something like that, right? That they have to talk to someone. And I think so, as you say, you survey and you listen and you dig in a little bit to say, really, what is the root cause of this ultimate challenge? And then that's how you really parse out, this much I can handle with things like information on my website, changing that architecture, and enhanced IVR, something like a chat bot, right? Versus, no, this really is a thing, not because we created it, because consumers need it, a space where that one-on-one interaction is actually the best way to meet the needs of the customer.
Okay, and since you brought it up, let's maybe spend a little bit of time there on chatbots, ways to automate processes that human in the loop is they can focus on the higher order side of things and less so on the things that are high volume and maybe of lower importance for a human to be doing those tasks.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things about technology is we tend to view it as the beginning of the process, right? And so certainly as new technology comes up, whether it's RPA or AI, right? In spending time investigating and understanding that technology is a really good use of resources and time. But the part that kind of starts to get tricky, right, is what does it take to truly implement something like that effectively and efficiently? And this gets back to like understanding your end-to-end business process, not just adding a presentation layer. So something like chatbot, for example, right? With chatbot, it's a wonderful technology and it's almost expected from most consumers nowadays that there's a way that I can talk to someone. I don't like picking up the phone. I would much rather just type it in to a computer and get my answer. But what does that really require for your organization to set up? It requires you to set up knowledge bases with tagging and and metadata that allows you to accurately answer a question as it comes in. You can also implement these technologies in kind of small ways or big ways. So you can do something that's normally an FAQ document, you can turn that into a chatbot relatively quickly, right? Or you can do much more robust functionality where I can look up my case number, I can find the disposition. And so I think in that space, what it's really important for folks to understand is, what does it take to truly implement that technology effectively in your organization that actually is adding value and not consuming additional resources? And I think when you get down to that level to say, I actually understand what my consumer need, I actually understand my business processes, then you can say, well, what's the right technology to solve those challenges, right? Instead of starting with the technology to begin with. We have a habit of saying that's the new fancy thing. Let's implement that as quickly as possible. And not as much of a habit, I think, across government of saying, hey, what is really the problem we're trying to solve? If I build a knowledge base, I can also have enhanced search functionality on my website. Maybe that actually meets the need of my consumer versus building a new technology that's unnecessary. So it really is a matter of understanding what is the driver of the problem that you're trying to solve from a consumer perspective. What's necessary to implement new technology and processes and systems, right? And will the end result ultimately improve that experience for both customers and employees, right? And ultimately, when you're trying to get enhancements or efficiencies, you're saying, one, I want to basically create a better experience for my employees, but I also want to use that extra bandwidth to do better things, like you were saying, like getting into that higher level work, not just something that's transactional.
All right, to change gears here a little bit, what I'd like to focus a little bit on, the digital experience side of things. There is, of course, a huge sprawl of .gov websites, and again, going back to that tension between sometimes the customer knows exactly what they want, and sometimes they don't know where that resides within the federal hierarchy of things, and sometimes they might go to one website and not quite know where to begin their journey in terms of obtaining that service. On the .gov side of things, on the online side of things, what kind of work is the Bureau doing to help customers navigate everything that's online and ultimately find what they're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So it varies for us kind of site by site, right? So we have a handful of sites, and whether that's Treasury Direct or that's USA Spending or Fiscal Data, or our own kind of Bureau website. And so it does vary kind of depending on who the consumer base, but there are a couple of key principles that we try to focus on. And at times I feel like a little bit of a broken record because they are the basic principles that we apply to CX generally, which is, one, really understand, do you understand your customer enough to build something that meets their needs, right? So step one has to be this kind of foundational understanding of the consumer of the information, right? We do tend to spend a lot of time across kind of any number of organizations on that presentation layer. And the presentation layer is like the easiest part of this conversation, right? Like I can make a clean, mostly limited information with nice buttons, right? But it's really about how you architect all that vast information so that it's easier to find. And so what we're really looking at, and of course we did this for Treasury Direct, we've done this for USA Spending, right? We're doing this for Fiscal Data, our Fiscal Data website, which is starting with that consumer need, understanding what are they really looking for and what's the best way to present that information. And then how do you architect the site so that the information is organized in a way that makes sense? That's kind of the one big principle. The second principle is across the site, what are the connecting themes, right? So if I'm on one page, let's say I'm on an IBON page looking at the rate, Well, I probably want to know how to buy it. I probably want to know how to redeem it. I probably want to know how to manage it. Instead of making me leave that page and go find other information, can I make sure that I'm linking like topics and making it easier to find? We've also done this for our agency customers on a tool called the Treasury Financial Experience, or TFX. And TFX is really about, there's all of this different policy and guidance and standards, right, around how federal financial management works. And it used to be all over the place in the government. We said, let's start to pull it together. Let's start to make it understandable, and let's organize it in a way that novices can understand and really well experienced CFOs and IT system directors can understand. And so those are kind of like the big principles. And then the third bucket here, right, is don't stop, right? Like once that website is up and you think you know what you're doing, keep those feedback mechanisms in place. Use your Google Analytics to measure where people are spending their most amount of time. Are they dropping off of the website before completing a task? Are they having trouble downloading files, right? And use things like active and passive survey so that you can get that immediate feedback from people who are in the site. What are you trying to accomplish? Did you? Why not? Right? So, and then building that back into your process to say, all right, my next release is in 6 months. Here are the feedback. This is the feedback I've received from my customers. How am I ensuring that I'm improving that experience the next time I do a release?
Okay, great. And actually, you mentioned something that I want to go a little bit deeper on, and that's just the idea of feedback. Easier to do on the online platforms because there are some data analytics baked into there. But let's look at that a little more broadly across this omni-channel experience, online, over the phone, mailed correspondence, things of that nature. Customers are coming from every which direction here, and this is the kind of thing where what gets measured is what matters. So let's maybe broaden that scope a little bit. How more broadly does the Bureau go about collecting that feedback and then implementing it and putting it into practice?
Absolutely. So I would say that we're kind of on the emerging side of this conversation, right? Where the web stuff is the easiest piece to kind of stand up. Historically, where we've really been is we've looked at things like SLAs, right? Or call abandonment and things like that, which are really kind of a customer service viewpoint into the interactions with the customer. How long is it taking to answer the phone? How, right, is the disposition that the call was closed effectively? What is the abandonment rate in that call, right? Where we're moving towards, right, is taking a step back and saying, okay, that gives me a baseline expectation and understanding about how my call center is operating. Which is a good thing to look at, right? We want to make sure that our call centers and other things like that are effective and efficient in their daily operations. But building into those conversations, okay, well, why do people call, right? We are seeing this the most in our retail program right now. And as we look towards the future, we're saying, how do we build that into the rest of our verticals? To say, how am I getting feedback on what is the primary driver of my volume? What is the primary kind of disposition of those calls? And what are the mechanisms we are going to put in place to capture feedback at the time of service? So we're really kind of at the beginning of that conversation of moving from baseline operational data into customer experience data that helps you prioritize the way you're evolving your business processes.
Okay, well, I actually want to circle back to something you said at the very beginning of the conversation. You said you hope we'd have time for it, and fortunately we do. This whole idea of building CX as a discipline, I think, is a very interesting one because it is a part of many things, but it is not necessarily those things. It's a part of IT, but not, necessarily all of IT. It's workforce, but it's not all of workforce. It's a real mishmash of things that need to go right. And so let's understand that a little bit better. How is the Bureau building up customer experience as a discipline unto itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So a handful of kind of things that we're working on. One is common vernacular, right? So in this space, we're doing a lot of work to say, well, what even is like, what do we mean by customer? What do we, right? Is a customer a stakeholder? Is it an end user, right? Is it a consumer of the service? Is it a user of the service? So in that space, right, think about our two main buckets. Is it the CFO? Is it the agency? Is it the IT system director? Is that person in IPP submitting an invoice? And generally you say it's all of them, right? Because they're all consuming some aspect of your service, but really understanding, well, what does that mean when there's multiples? And how do you prioritize that hierarchy of, right, this is the purchaser of my service, the user of my service, right? So really getting that kind of common vernacular. The second thing that we're spending a lot of time on is understanding what CX capabilities really mean and how you right size that for the organization. So one of the things when I came into this, I said I wasn't going to do, right, is send hundreds of people off to get a CX certification template on the end of their name, right? That's wonderful. Like training and certification is a wonderful component of how you build and drive culture across the organization. But without the support systems in place, right, and an understanding of everyone's role in driving these processes, it can fall flat at the end of the day, and in fact create frustration among employees and managers and executives, right? So really taking a step back and saying, look, I've got executive leadership, I've got middle management, I've got product developers, right? I've got business owners, I've got people doing transaction processing. Let's make sure we take the time and define what everyone's role is in this conversation, because everyone does have a role. It's really important for the entire organization to understand and be bought into the fact that you're putting, to be customer centric means to put the customer at the center. And everyone has a part of doing that, whether that's business process automation, the front end web page, the person answering the phone, right? The executive making the decisions about how their resources are being allocated, but taking a step back and saying, let's define that landscape and really determine what individual people's roles are in that conversation. And then the third piece is about building capability at a central level and then at an individual level. By building kind of the CCO organization, this Office of Customer Experience Management, we're talking about what's the kind of central capability we need to build in. That's like the pure CX discipline, right? I don't necessarily need 3,000 people to know human-centered design practices, right? I do need folks to understand its value and to engage with that capability at the right times in their product development lifecycle. And so as we build out that CEM organization, making sure that we have that central capability that can be leveraged within the organization at the times that the discipline is really needed, not just the devotion.
Okay, and just to build on that for a little bit longer, recognizing this is such a cross-discipline type thing, what are all the skill sets that the Bureau is looking to bring in here to ensure that whole of excellence regarding CX is possible?
Right, absolutely. So certainly within our organization, we've spent a lot of time in kind of this product management, product development, program management space, right? Those key positions are really, really important for us as we think about building and implementing our programs and projects. But those functions also really support a customer-centric culture by making sure that the work streams are built in, the time is built in to both understand the customer at the beginning and then bake them into the process over time as you're building and deploying your service. So that's one big piece that is certainly important for the CX work, but adds value to our organization overall. Specific to CX, really thinking about the kind of maybe 3 or 4 different areas, right? So research and design. So really like, how do you actually go about getting customer information, right? Anyone can write a survey. Is it the most effective research tool? Is a thing that takes time and understanding and experience to really build the tool that will get you the information you need so that you can prioritize your work. It's not about just the question you're trying to answer, but what are the questions you ask to get the answer to the question that you're trying to get into. So what is the challenge for the customer might be the biggest kind of question, but if you just ask the customer that question, you're not going to get the answers that you need to understand how to build build a better product for them. And then the second piece is this, what we would consider like service design, right? You're seeing this capability kind of being built across the government, but certainly one of the things we're looking at is service design. And the reason I bring that up is kind of a key piece is we talked earlier about that presentation layer, right? Like I can build a pretty website tomorrow, but service design really goes below that surface of the high level journey and says, what are all those business processes that are in the end-to-end that are actually feeling their way up into the customer experience? I can have a really easy form to use at the front end, but if the business processes on the back end are creating a clunky process and creating a 6 to 8 week, right, lead time for something happening on the back end, those are the places that you can clean up your kind of program areas in a way that benefits the customer without that direct, right, kind of here, move the button on the website, right?
Okay, well, clearly the Bureau has put a lot of thought into what, is needed for a good CX experience. Some other agencies might be a little earlier in that journey or, a little earlier in that learning curve. And this is, of course, something that the administration has prioritized across government. So just as someone who has been there and done that, what are some of those common stumbling blocks, some of those barriers, bottlenecks, whatever you want to call them, in terms of getting a successful CX program up and running, and what are maybe the first steps that they should take to make that successful?
Yeah, great. So I think there's two halves to this answer, and they build on each other, right? So the big stumbling blocks here, right? Trying to go too big, too far, too fast. If you're talking about ultimately what we're talking about, right, is changing culture in an organization to understand the discipline and apply it to their day-to-day lives, right? And so thinking that what you need to do is stand up this multi-million-dollar, right, massive technology VOC program, right, that answers, now I have all of the data, right? Like that's where I think people will struggle to both stand it up and to find value in that work long term. So what the recommendation that I would have, right, is start small in the places where you need to the most, right? So in particular, if you're facing a crisis, right? So lots of agencies have areas where they might be facing crisis. Start there because there's an urgent need and there's focused resources, right? Start small by saying, what do I even know who my customer is in this conversation, right? What is the value in bringing them in and what am I trying to accomplish? And start with little processes, right? Because really it's about building the muscle and building the understanding and building the kind of value proposition within your organization to say, this isn't just like fluffy, we care about customers conversation, right? This is about really applying a discipline into the way that you're doing your day-to-day work. And so if you start small, something as simple as a form, right? Like, where am I seeing a challenge? Or ask your customers, where are you challenged? And it doesn't have to be, right, a statistically significant, massive research study. Just ask a couple of people to give yourself some level of hypothesis to figure out where can I spend a little bit of energy to improve a process, to improve an interaction. And then that'll help you kind of build your muscle and your understanding and your knowledge of the discipline, particularly if you don't already have, a research and design organization or a bunch of CX specialists or a bunch of service designers. You can do this work very basically in smaller portions to get an understanding of it. There are also lots of resources. Google can be your friend if you just ask Google, like, what are the things that I need to do if I'm just trying to stand up this process? 150 people have written a blog about this, right? So really kind of seek out kind of the expertise and I would say, look, the VA has done a wonderful job of standing up an organization to starting with small things, but in these kind of really specific emergency cases. We've been applying it in areas like where we have the most need, like savings bonds, right? Like the QSMO, where we had a designation, we had to do the work. And so find the opportunities, take some time to find where you think there's really good opportunities, and where you're going to have buy-in up and down your organization. You're going to want executive leadership to be on board. You're going to want your front-end staff to be on board, right? You're going to want all the people in the middle to be on board, and whether that's the CIO and the IT organization, like your CFO. Really, I think so. Starting small investments, small projects, not asking a whole bunch of employees to fundamentally disrupt their life to create a improved process. That's where you're going to start to see value and where you're going to learn your lessons. So you can start to apply that across the entire organization. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go still as an organization. And really that's where we've seen the most benefit, is when we really focused in on something as simple as the IVR menu, right? Or an email that is going out the door, instead of trying to say, I'm going to fundamentally transform, right? We'll get there, right? We'll get to that fundamental transformation over years of work. But thinking about those small little moments that you can just say, this is just rough. Like, we can actually change that tomorrow if we make the decision to. But before we do, maybe ask someone how they feel who's actually using the service.
All right. Well, we have covered a lot of ground here, Matt, but I think we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank today's guest, Matt Garber, the Chief Customer Officer for the Bureau of the Fiscal Service at the Treasury Department. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now, let me send you back to the studio for more on the CX Exchange.